Welcome everybody. It's great to have a room full of people who are interested in neuroscience and walking. I am so thrilled actually that we are able to have this conversation. It's the first in a series, a new theme that we're opening up, thanks to the suggestion of a number of people who have been participating in our programs over the last 2 years. And that theme, that topic is what we're learning about the brain from neuroscience that might inform what we think we understand from our experience from our spiritual life. And I promised Shane that I won't drag him into making statements about that might validate in any way some of the things that we think we experience in our spiritual lives. This is going to be a discussion of the scientific research. But what's so interesting to me about his work, which is extensive, and I'll tell you about that in a second, is that in particular, the book that we're going to focus on tonight, In Praise of Walking, is very much aligned to several of the themes that we have been exploring for the past couple years. One of the themes that we'll be talking about tonight is the impact of nature and the outdoors on our bodies and brains. Another theme that we'll be talking about is ways in which we can improve our sense of well-being, wellness, wholeness. Another topic that we'll dive into tonight is kind of new perspectives on aging. And in fact, is there evidence that we might be able to reverse the aging process of the brain? And then a final thing, which will lead into a book that we won't quite get a chance to talk about tonight, but he has a new book out on communication and the way in which we actually construct memory and learning through communication. But we have been talking for the past couple of years a lot about how we're hardwired for connection and communication. So we'll get into a whole lot of other things tonight. I'm sure we've gone on a 2-hour walk today, this afternoon, and we had covered a lot of ground physically and mentally. But I should now take the opportunity to introduce Dr. O'Mara. Shane is a professor of experimental brain research at Trinity College in Dublin, not Dublin, Connecticut, Dublin, Ireland. He's also the founder and director of the college's Institute on Neuroscience, and he's a member of the academic staff of the School of Psychology. His CV is about 20 pages long, so I won't continue on enumerating all the many plaudits. You can look it up online. Very distinguished fellow in our midst tonight, and a really nice guy to boot. So I'm thrilled to have you here, Shane, and look forward to the conversation that we're going to have. I also just want to kind of get us rolling because we do have a lot of ground to cover tonight. So I will actually take the lead and offer about 5 different questions in the beginning to kind of make sure we cover the full expanse of the topics that Shane is investigating in his book. And then hopefully about somewhere between 7:45 and 8 o'clock, we will open up the floor to questions. I'm sure you're going to have lots of them. We will be handing around a mic or two. Please do use the mic because there are people online who are watching this live stream, and we also are recording this session tonight. So it'll be important for people to be able to hear the brilliant question you're going to ask. We might try to do a little exercise. We talked about doing this at one point, see if we have time that shows us how our brains work. But I'm going to first just ask you, because I'm dying to know, how the heck did you get interested in neuroscience to begin with?
Yes, so that's an American story, actually. When I was a kid, my parents had friends who worked for the Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC, which I believe doesn't exist anymore. But they were transferred over here, and my parents come over to visit them. And my dad said to me, "What would you like me to bring you back from the US?" And because I was a kind of a weird kid, I said, "Bring me back some newspapers and bring me back some books." And the book he brought me back, which I have treasured ever since, was a book by Carl Sagan called Broca's Brain. And that's how I got into neuroscience. That was the kind of the singular moment when I thought this is actually something I could pursue.
Oh,
And that's what I did.
and you've been on this path ever since.
Yes, I haven't been able to get off.
Amazing. All right, well, so let me think. I think where I'd really like to start, first, we all think that we know a lot about walking, right? And many of us are walkers. And I think we, personally experience the physiological benefits of walking. But I would love for you to tell the story of the 62-year-old man who replicated the lifestyle of the 5,000-year-old mummy that they found in the Alps. And over a period of 3 months, and the physiological changes that he underwent as he took that trek across the Alps.
Yeah, so this story is a really important and interesting story. So are there any runners here? Anybody who does a marathon? So I'm not a runner. I'm not objecting to people who are runners, but if you want to be a naive, or if you're a naive runner and you want to run a marathon, it'll take you, what, 4-6 months of training, maybe more. I'm getting a nodding head at the back. It could be 9 months. It takes a lot to change your body to do that. But if you want to walk 1,200 kilometers, it takes your body about 2 weeks to get used to that. We are adapted to be preternaturally good walkers. And the story at the start of the book that I give is of a 62-year-old male who had previously lived a sedentary life and undertook to walk the Via Alpina, which is on the Italian and Swiss border. They hooked him up with a whole bunch of physiological pieces of kit, and off he went. And he knocked out about 18, 20, 24 kilometers a day, depending on the terrain. And it took about 7 to 10 days to get used to that. And he kept it up for the next 3 months without any trouble at all. And the point that I want to get across is our bodies readily adapt to regular long distance walking. And we know from observing, for example, people who live in non-mechanized societies, the Hadza in Tanzania have been very well studied. They walk, males typically 14 to 20 kilometers a day from about the age of 3 or 4. The oldest observed has been in their 80s, and they'll do that day in, day out. Females typically walk somewhere between 10 and 16 kilometers a day, again, from about the age of 3 or 4, all the way through the course of life. So it's something that we're readily adapted to, and we have forgotten because we've built a world where we don't walk much anymore.
And wasn't there some pretty substantial changes to his body during that period in terms of, there was of course some weight drop.
Loads of positive changes. Yeah. Inflammatory factors in his blood fell, cardiovascular disease risk factors fell, a whole series of things like that. His fat to body weight ratio fell, not as much as people might expect. And there's a reason for that our metabolism dynamically adjusts. And you don't lose as much weight from exercise as people think you do, because most of what you eat during the course of the day goes to the maintenance of ordinary bodily functions. But the kind of key things, cardiovascular disease, inflammatory factors, those kinds of things all fell, and really fell very, very substantially. And this is something that's replicated many, many times. If you observe people who, for example, the Camino is a very good place to do it. If you take people's bloods at the start and at the end, you find that what are called the pro-inflammatory factors fall very substantially. In fact, a friend of mine did the Camino a few years ago before the pandemic, and he met a German cardiologist who does the Camino every year for that reason.
Amazing. Right. And I think one of the things that I was actually struck by when reading that chapter was also that, and maybe it was not that chapter, but another, that you made a statement about the intensity of the exercise might not be as important as we think it is, that walking, in fact, has so many important benefits that, some of us think that we need to go to the gym and really have a heavy workout. And in fact, we're not actually getting that much more out of it than what we would if we were walking.
So this is, I think, we're really only getting to grips with understanding human metabolism, I think, in the last 5 or 10 years. And you've all heard the admonition, eat less, exercise more as the route to losing weight. And that advice is nonsense. It doesn't work, just doesn't work. Because if you eat less, your metabolism slows and you actually output less energy. And you may find actually you gain weight because you're actually not moving as much as you thought you were. But if you want to lose weight, what you need to do is shift your diet, eat lots of greens and not eat lots of jellies. We kind of know this. But the kind of the key point there is that if you want to use exercise, walking as a form of exercise, that's a good thing, but you need to ask yourself what sort of walking, under what circumstances, and when. So if you're trying to get cardiovascularly fit, walking can be very good for that. If you walk at a clip that stops you talking comfortably to somebody else, that's about the right rate. Or if you're finding it difficult to maintain an active conversation, that will do it for you. But if you're walking for other purposes, like today, we had a lovely stroll, get to know each other, social walking, you don't do that at a high speed. That's not a...
we didn't.
We didn't.
No.
I thought it was a gentle walk.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
I had to give Mark a crutch at the end.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it was fun. We'll come back to this, I think, at some point, but I want to shift gears now and talk about the psychological benefits of walking. You have a whole chapter. And part of the reason why I want to do that is that in reading that chapter, I was really struck by how many times some of the things that you were saying were sort of benefits of walking or outcomes of walking, are the kinds of things that I actually think of myself as the benefits and outcomes of some of the spiritual practices that I've undertaken now and then. And so I'd love to do a little bit of a dive in that, especially the impact of walking, on sort of mental health, stress, and some of the other things that are activated.
Yes, so we can think about this in a couple of different ways. So a really simple way to think about the effect of walking on what we technically call your subjective well-being. We can ask people to give a rating for how you think you're feeling in the moment on a scale of 1 to 5. And that actually relates pretty well to how you are actually feeling if you're to do a full-blown clinical interview. So a simple trick is to bring people to the lab and say, you're going to come to the lab and we're either going to get you to rate pictures of buildings, or we're going to walk around and you're going to look at the buildings and we're going to get you to give a rating of those buildings. And so this is incidental walking. You're not being told that you're going for a walk for the purposes of checking your well-being. And if you ask people then just to fill in a bunch of questionnaires, and one of the things they do is rate how they're feeling in the moment. You might say they're feeling around about a 3 or a 4. Get them to walk about and get them to fill in the same questionnaires again. And you typically will find that people, even people who hate walking, their sense of subjective well-being will have risen by about, let's say, from 3.5, 4 to 4.5, which is quite a lot over a very short intervention, which might be about an hour or even less than that. And that's kind of nice. We all know that you feel good if you walk, but can you go further than that? And the answer is yes. There's now lots and lots of really high quality data. And I talk about a study from Australia in the book, which tracks people over an 8 or 10 year period and tracks the likelihood that they're going to have major depressive disorder over that period of time. And for every increment in walking above the lowest level of activity that people engage in, there's about a 5 to 8% fall in the likelihood that you will succumb to major depressive disorder. And the evidence, I think, is now overwhelming that as a prophylactic, regular exercise is a really remarkable way of sort of future-proofing yourself or building resilience against the likelihood that you will suffer from depression, especially if you undertake that exercise with another person. Social connection is really, really important. And I think the kind of the culminating point that I get to in the book is that we underestimate how important social walking is to us. We are absolutely superlative social walkers. We're very, very keenly attuned to each other when we're moving in the world. And if you think about it, when we made that long march out of Africa 60,000 years ago, it wasn't one guy with a spear. It was a family. It was a tribe. It was a group. It was people walking together. And to survive under those circumstances, or think of the long trek across this country to get to California, you have to be very sensitively attuned to each other's needs and wants as walkers, because this country, of course, was conquered under non-mechanized circumstances, horse-drawn carriages, people on foot.
Well, let's talk about social walking more.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was struck by was just how much synchronization goes on when we're actually walking together. Bodies, breathing, our minds, and our hearts. I want to hear you talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah. So, any of you who've had kids in this room will know when a kid wants to annoy you when you're taking them out for a walk, they walk too slowly. They walk behind you. They walk with very small baby steps just to get on your wick. And if somebody wants to annoy you, another way of annoying you is to walk too fast. And I'm sure you've all had that experience where you've experienced the discomfort of somebody who won't walk at the same rate as you. Naturally, what we do without thinking about it is we synchronize. If somebody with long legs is walking with somebody with short legs, they shorten their stride length. The person with the shorter legs might walk just a tiny bit faster. So we accommodate to each other quickly and we accommodate to each other easily. We have to swerve or move around a corner or whatever. We do that without one person saying to the other, you have to move left here. We do it together because we are really attuned to each other. But what we're actually doing is watching from our peripheral vision the changes in shoulder stance, position of the head, all of those kinds of things. And we're also walking, when we're walking together, we're paying joint attention, not to each other. We're paying joint attention to something out there. So we're looking at the horizon, we're looking at into the distance. We're not staring into each other's eyes. It's actually kind of an unpleasant thing. Yeah, it is uncomfortable. And that's just kind of from an observational level. If we were to hook people up to something to monitor their breathing, their heart rate, even activity in the brain, what you'll find is, of course, there'll be synchrony in leg movement and arm movement. You'll find that the arm swing comes into register with each other. Breathing does not if you're talking, because when one person is speaking, the other person is breathing in. So you have an anti-synchrony going on in that case. But equally, you can have companionable silence, which is perfectly fine too, in which case you get synchronous breathing happening as well. And if you look at activity in parts of the brain that are concerned with motor movement, they're synchronized as well. But they're synchronized in two really interesting kinds of ways. One is to mimic what's going on beside you, and the other is to anticipate what's going to happen in front of you. Because when you're walking, what you have to do is figure out where you're going to put your foot. And if you're walking on a surface which might be rough, your eyes flick ahead, your eyes track back, and then you place your foot. And if you're walking with somebody, if you're hiking, for example, when you're doing the same thing on the same trail, both of you will be doing this at the same time. And you will be learning from each other or copying each other about where it's safe to put your foot. And you do this in about a fifth of a second, and you're not even conscious of it.
Mm.
Why? Because you've got lots of other things to do.
So is it too much to say that we're literally hardwired for sort of connection?
Oh, no, not at all. Connection is the core of being human. Look at this room. You guys have never met me before. I only met Mark this size on a Zoom call.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if you think about two of our primate relatives, chimpanzees are about 30 times as aggressive with each other as humans are. If you look at chimpanzee bones, they have bites, they have breaks. If you track them in zoos or wherever, they fight all the time. Orangutans don't. They're completely solitary, except for the purposes of reproduction. Humans occupy a really interesting sweet spot between those 2 points. If we were like chimpanzees, we could only ever live in small troops. We could never meet like this. We would be fighting. And if we were orangutans, we would be running very far away from each other. If we were fire ants, we would be fighting. If we were troops of wild dogs, we would look after those within the pack, but I couldn't wander in here as a non-pack member and talk to you. So humans have this amazing capacity to trust each other and to make connection with each other that is denied, I think, just about every other species on the planet.
So that has all kinds of implications. I mean, I think one of the interesting things in the last couple of years is how much we've longed for connection and haven't been able to enjoy it because of COVID.
Yeah.
And I would say even before COVID, because of the technology that we've become so obsessed with. I mean, it's arguably connects us in ways that we haven't before, but it also disconnects us in some ways. And what is your take on where we go next
I don't know.
as a species?
I should be honest. I just simply don't know. I think on the one hand, allows us to collapse the world. So you send me an email, I respond.
We're talking about
We have a
that.
Zoom, we meet,
It's amazing.
and the world is amazing like that.
Yeah.
So being able to have that kind of connection so easily in the modern world is just fantastic. Beyond that, I don't really know. Some people are saying that the mental health crisis that's seen in many teens is directly blamed on phones, but I'm not convinced that that's true. There are quite a few panel studies that economists have been conducting in this country and in Europe, showing that competition within the school system actually is the problem. And that's become more acute over the last number of years. And if you ask teens what the source of stress in their lives are, not the phones, their peers. And it may be the intensification of peer relations because the phones is the problem, but not necessarily the phones themselves. But beyond that, I don't know.
So is there any evidence that because we have this unique, or as far as primates go, special gift for connection, that it gives us some kind of power to make things happen that we would not, that others cannot? I mean, I'm thinking about large groups of people and how we integrate really large groups of people into a focus of activity.
Yeah, but again, think what humans have managed to do. We've invented institutions, we've invented deliberative assemblies. No group of locusts has ever sat down and decided what they're going to do and take a vote on that. No chimpanzee troop has ever done that, but we do it. We are very, very happy to sit in fora like this, hear each other's voices, and hash out a solution of some sort together.
There's also the danger that we can delude each other into thinking
Yeah, that can happen too.
things that are not there as well.
Yeah, that can happen.
You know that all too well.
But there will be another group competing that will have a different view,
Yeah.
and they may win.
Let's switch gears again and talk about nature. It appears in many of the chapters of your book. So clearly it's an experience that is important to us and important to you, with wide range of impacts. So walk us through, oops, that's a pun. Walk us through.
Okay, well,
What happens to our bodies and brains when we are outdoors in nature?
so we can answer this question in two different ways. We can expose people to nature and ask what happens, and we can deprive people of nature and ask what happens. And if you look at the way we've designed our towns and cities over the last 50 or 100 years, we've denuded them of nature. And I make it's not quite a joke, but I make the point in the book that you have leafy suburbs here. We have leafy suburbs in Dublin. Those are the places that people will pay a premium to live in. And there's a reason for that, because you have easy access to nature. And there's a reason why Central Park is a place that people go to. There's a reason why the Phoenix Park in Dublin is a place that people go to. We need regular exposure to nature. And if you, for example, take people who are suffering high levels of stress and you deliberately bring them into a nature setting where there's lots of green available to them on a regular basis, what you find is a marked fall in stress hormones. And it's a sustained fall if they keep the practice of exposing themselves to the complexity of nature. And there's lots of reasons why nature is good for you. One is that when you're in nature, we humans find it inherently fascinating. You hear the birds, you see bees floating around, you see the beautiful flowers, you have all sorts of things like that going on. But you can go further than that. The experience of being in nature is one vital way, and Mark and I have talked about this, of experiencing a sense of awe in your everyday life. And by awe, I don't mean like a kind of a cheap feeling. What I mean is a feeling where you stand when you're out in nature in perspective, or you impose a perspective on yourself with regard to where you are in the universe. You don't necessarily belittle yourself, but you feel like you're a small thing in a large world. And that's okay. It's not a negative feeling, it's a positive feeling. It allows you to decenter yourself and perhaps put what feel like very prominent feelings of distress or anxiety or annoyance over somebody not filling in a form at work or whatever it happens to be, that you get away from the feelings of annoyance of everyday life. And that experience is something that I think walking can give us, especially if you have a regular exposure to nature during walking. And this is something I think we've designed out of our towns and cities, but we can design back in very, very easily.
Well, so it sounds like walking is an antidepressant and also a way in which we can begin to experience the transcendent. And it has a sort of a physiological
it has those properties for sure.
Impact on us.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Huh. So that would actually mean that we would be well served to get out and about regularly. And we're lucky to be living here in Southport for sure.
Yeah. And the thing to remember, of course, is that if you don't walk, you decondition very quickly. So we know from monitoring experiments where you monitor how much activity people engage in, that you get, depending on the study you look at, something like between a third and a 50% fall in all-cause mortality if you're putting out somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 steps a day, which is not very much. Okay, so if you track infants when they're learning to walk, they're typically walking somewhere around about 800, maybe 1,200 steps per hour. And the Hadza, whom I mentioned earlier on, are doing 14,000 to 18,000 steps per day. So the demand is not so very much, but the problem is fitting it in somehow into our daily lives. And of course, the car is a really easy alternative when you have to go. We have this issue where we need movement in order to be healthy, but we've designed movement out of our lives because movement costs energy. You know, we humans need to conserve energy, but we've solved the energy problem in our modern world. With plenty of calories everywhere we go. Calories are easy to get. The problem is movement. And my own view there is that what we really need to do is focus on taking the spotlight off the individual and designing our environment so that it's easy for people to walk. And if, for example, you look across the westernized world, not necessarily the Western world, people walk most in Japan. And even though it's really one of the car production superpowers, it's also a country that, because it's so small and it's got such a large population, people have to walk a lot more than they can drive. So the average Japanese person walks somewhere around about 6,000 to 8,000 steps a day, depending on the study that you look at. And people walk least in Saudi Arabia, not because they're inherently lazy in Saudi Arabia, it's because they don't have any infrastructure for it. There are migratory tribes there who do walk very, very long distances, but the problem comes down to the infrastructure. If you look at this country, I'll ask you to guess, which city do people walk the most in? Of course. Where do they walk the least?
LA,
No, actually, believe it or not.
Houston,
And
Houston?
San Antonio,
San Antonio. Texas.
and places like that. Yeah, and Boston is number 2. San Francisco, I think, is number 3 for walking.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, another thing about walking that I've personally experienced, I spend a lot of time writing and thinking. I always, when I get stuck, go for a walk. And my favorite chapter in the book was your chapter about creative walking, mindlessly wandering, which is truly one of my favorite things to do, which seems to be the opposite of mindfulness. But you went through quite an elaborate description of why that actually does help us solve problems. And I would love for everybody to hear you go through that.
Yeah, so I'll tell a little story first. Ireland's greatest mathematician, his name is, he's long dead now, William Rowan Hamilton. And one of the reasons we're here is because of William Rowan Hamilton. He invented quaternions, which are at the heart of graphics engines. So the lovely graphics that you have over there depend on quaternion calculations. Your electric toothbrush depends on calculations he figured out as well. And the story goes that he had been trying to understand or devise this new form of mathematics. It's a very, very peculiar form of mathematics where 4 plus 2 is 6, but 2 plus 4 is not 6. So it's mathematics without commutativity. I know it hurts my head every time. I think about it. A friend of mine who actually is a mathematician says you should never think about it. You should only do the calculation. But anyway, that's a by the by. But Hamilton used to walk every day from the observatory in North Dublin in Dunsink to Trinity College, which is a distance of about 11 kilometers. And he would usually walk with a pen and a piece of paper, and he used to be observed nodding his head, wandering around. And one day, the equation came into his head, and he had no pen, no paper, but he had a tobacco knife. So he scratched the equation into a stone on a bridge over the canal in North Dublin, ran to Trinity, got a piece of paper, and came back and wrote it down in case he would forget it. But what he says in that, when you read his autobiography, he says that his daily walks were an absolute essential, that he needed to think and not to think at the same time. He needed to focus on and then not focus on the problem. And he then has this wonderful phrase where he says, and the day he discovered the quaternion equation, that an electric circuit seemed to close in his mind and a spark flashed forth. And the key point is that the walking for him, as for so many creatives, is an essential part of their daily creative routine. Stephen King, who lives not, I guess, too far from here, maybe 200 or 300 miles up the road, is a an avid walker and walks all the time. And I give a great many examples in the book of walkers. Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, for example, would always walk before writing. He would be seen to be kind of nodding his head while he was walking along. Immanuel Kant every day would be seen in Regensburg at 3 p.m., march out into the square and do a circuit, and then he would write. Now, you could say, well, maybe these people are a bit odd, and that would be fine. Maybe they are. But is there a link between walking and creativity? Well, there are two ways, there are a few ways of thinking about this. One is just to ask the straightforward question. If we get you to walk before doing something creative, does that help with creative ideation? And the answer is yes. And we can show that in lots of different ways. So if you're brought to the experimental psych lab and you're asked to do an experiment in creativity, typically what you'd be given is a task where you're given a series of household objects, maybe a glass, maybe a pair of spectacles, a book, or whatever it is. And you're given 30 seconds to come up with as many uses as you can for each of these objects. People vary in their ability to do this task. Some people are really good at generating lots and lots of uses, and some people are really, really bad. And if you take their scores on a creativity task like this, you can predict with a really high degree of fidelity whether or not they are knowledge workers or not. They're people who are working in areas that require some form of symbolic reasoning. But here's the trick. If you get people to do a walk, maybe a circuit around the corridors for 10 or 15 minutes before you get them to do this creative idea production, what you find on average is it about doubles the numbers of ideas they come up with. That's, I think, fantastic. But a group in Japan went much further than this. And what they did was they took a group of people in their late 60s and early 70s and compared them to a group in their late teens and early 20s and showed that the older walkers were producing, or were after this small intervention, about twice as many ideas as the sedentary 18 to 22-year-old. So if you're stuck, yeah, there's always a hack. If you're stuck with a problem, don't sit there banging your head off the keyboard. Get up, leave it, tell your boss you're going to be gone for an hour, and you'll have the problem solved when you come back.
Well, this has all kinds of implications for work and also school.
Yeah.
I mean, we're sitting there all the time.
Which is a deeply unnatural behavior, especially if you're a 4-year-old boy.
Now, I think the other thing is that it sounds like it should be absolutely permissible to be in this space of not thinking quite regularly. In fact, we are.
But see, I think that's you've mentioned a really important point there. Where creative idea production is concerned, there's long been a theory, which I don't think has been well understood in the outside world, that you need a period of incubation. So time on the task, but also downtime, time away from the task. And there are all sorts of ways of showing this. So for example, there's a great series of experiments where you give people complex anagrams to solve before they go to bed, and they're really pretty bad at doing them. But if you just let them read complex anagrams before they go to bed and solve them when they wake up, suddenly you find much, much better. Why? Things are happening in your head while you're asleep. Knowledge structures are being sorted, you're dreaming, there's all sorts of other things going on, all sorts of associations are occurring. I think we make this mistake of thinking that time on a task is productive time, time away from a task is not productive time. That's not how your head works. Both can be productive, but just one doesn't involve active attention to that task. And the technical term is interleaving. If you're stuck on one thing, go do something else, then come back to that thing that you're stuck at. You're more likely to solve it.
All right, one more question, then I'm going to open it up, but some of us in this room have gray hair, so for those of us getting up there in years, there's an entire section in the book about the impact of walking on the brain, and the fact that it might be possible to reverse some of the aging process of the brain by walking. Did I get that right?
Almost.
Good.
I have to be nuanced here. You're never going to turn back time completely, right? But if you think about walking as a challenge to the brain and the body, when you stand up, so we're seated at the moment. We're all seated in the room apart from the camera, yeah, and you see it standing at the back. That's actually quite a challenge to the body and to the brain, because maintaining stability is inherently a hard thing, whereas flopping in a chair is an easy thing. So getting up and then moving, going somewhere with purpose, again, is a challenge to the body, challenge to the brain. It's a challenge to your sense of stability. It's a challenge to your sense of movement. And that kind of regular challenge is a really, really important thing. A slogan that I hope you'll remember after this talk, if you don't remember anything else, is what's good for your heart is good for your brain. Getting the circulation from the heart to the brain actively engaged in a regular basis is a really good thing. Okay, let me cut to the chase here. If you take a group of sedentary 68 to 72-year-olds and you divide them into two groups, one group are asked to go out with another person for a walk 3 times a week of about 2 to 3 miles, and the other group are just left to do their own thing. You measure all sorts of things in their bloods, you measure the volume of particular brain areas, and you measure things to do with memory and attention and all of those kinds of things. And then you just track them for a year. Which group was going to have the better outcome?
Walkers.
We know this. What you will typically find, depending on the study that you look at, is that if somebody is performing at the level of a 72-year-old and they're age 70, after this intervention of regular activity, you'll drag that performance back to around about 70, or maybe even a little bit younger. The point being that getting out there regularly is really vital for both your body and for your brain. But you can go further than that. You can ask, what happens to areas of the brain that are concerned with learning and memory? So one key area of the brain that's concerned with learning and memory is a brain area that goes by a very inelegant name, the hippocampal formation. So it's an area that runs from about the tip of the ear to the temple. We know if you damage this area, you will suffer a grave amnesia. You will not recover from it. And we know also that this is the first area of the brain to be damaged by Alzheimer's disease. But we also know that it's really plastic. If you engage in regular exercise, it increases in volume ever so slightly compared to people who are not engaged in regular exercise. And in fact, a colleague of mine in a famous study about 20 years ago took London taxi drivers. Do any of you know this study? So any of you here been to London? I'm sure some of you have. Yeah. So London is amazingly complicated. It's, I think, 20,000 streets. And to qualify as a taxi driver, you have to learn the names of all of those streets, and you have to learn the routes between them all. It takes about 3 years on average to qualify as a taxi driver there. And what Eleanor Maguire showed was that in taxi drivers, but not in bus drivers, so a bus driver takes a fixed route, that's it, same route every day, whereas a taxi driver doesn't. The challenge is a different route all the time. That the taxi drivers have a larger hippocampus compared to the bus drivers. When you do a like-for-like comparison of the amount of time and mileage they've spent on the road, a really, really remarkable result.
Wow.
Just all of that navigational experience really has a profound effect on this part of the brain.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground. I'm sure that has sparked all kinds of questions here in the group. So let's find that mic and get it going around. Yeah, anyone have a question?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Fascinating. But I'm a person that has a goal to try to walk more. What do you consider optimal in terms of number of days, number of steps? And please describe what you mean by kilometers.
So I think I'm in the only country in the world that doesn't use kilometers. I don't know what Fahrenheit means. I have to look it up. So to me today was 26C.
So, well, oh, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Temperature.
I don't know what Fahrenheit is. So kilometer is 5/8 of a mile. So if you can do that fractional multiplication in your head, I'll be very impressed. I need to use my phone. So I don't want to be terribly prescriptive because I don't think that's fair. And but I think the normal advice I give is 5,000 steps a day more than you usually do. Because when you track the number of steps that you do, you'll be disappointed by how few they are. So I say turn your phone on and check regularly how many steps you've done. 10,000 steps is a made up number, but it's a really handy number. So if you're doing 10,000 steps reasonably regularly, 5 or 6 days a week, that's very good. Most adults don't do that. Most adults are doing somewhere between 4,000 or 5,000 steps a day. And many adults are doing 3,000 to 4,000 steps a day, which is not very much at all, whereas children are doing lots and lots. So that would be my advice. Turn on your mobile phone and or step count and use that as a means, and just try and do a lot more than you're doing. And do it evenly through the day. I think a little often is much better than a lot occasionally. Hi, David.
Which one are we?
Go
for
ahead.
it. Go for
Go
it.
ahead. We'll bring the mic back.
By Bill Carson. It's a one, and he does this autobiographical, the Appalachian Trail, and it's, being out walking. And
Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
Read it, it's like such an engaging book, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but anyway, it's all about walking.
Yeah, no, I've read it. I recommend it. It's a brilliant book. But yeah.
David.
I was taken in tow by a kid. I was a kid brother by my 79-year-old grandfather, who was Episcopalian, and he took me out, and I tore ahead of him like most kids do, and he said, "Whoa, you are in a greater church, let's say. You're to stop and you're to look and move silently. That's the way the pioneers were taught." And I tried the same disciplinary experiment with my own grandchildren. I held up a wastebasket and said, "Put your cell phones in here and you'll get them back." And I failed dismally. And of my experience with them, I even wrote my own book called Breaking in the Tenderfoot. And now that I'm 81, and this winter I had to have a aortic valve replacement and a pacemaker installed back to back. And I now look at walking both with people that are my age, because the kids won't be involved, but you have to split the discipline of looking around you and taking in your surroundings. And I get frustrated of looking ahead at those branches and thinking, ugh, I'm gonna trip over that stuff and wake up with neuropathy tomorrow morning. And I just wonder how you find as age advances, you can cope with that, because that's where I'm at the present time. Do you have any thoughts there?
I don't know that I have any good thoughts for you because I'm not too advanced in age yet. I'm not 81. I'm only 76. That's a joke. I think, you know, the walking environment we have, the one we've created, isn't often very safe for us. You know, trip hazards are everywhere. We've done things like design crosswalks and other things to make them uncomfortable for people who are older. We've designed them so that the walking pace that you need to maintain to cross the road safely is, you know, something like 1.2 meters a second, which is often an uncomfortable pace for somebody who's older. So I've said this several times and I'll say it again. We shouldn't focus on the individual so much. We need to focus on how we design the environment around the individual. You know, we shouldn't have trip hazards. We should have safe areas to walk. Crosswalks should be raised so that, you know, but this comes down to policy issues. You know, what are the building codes like? Yeah.
I have a question. This discussion has been focusing on walking. Well, what about other forms of exercise, like bike riding or swimming or playing golf? Can you expect the same benefits that you get from walking? And I'll just add, my wife's a walker. I have found ski poles are very helpful to me to keep up with it. And not only keeping the balance, but I can keep the pace then with her. So I suggest that ski poles if you're having trouble walking.
Yeah, or Nordic walking as it's called. I think, look, cycling a bike is great if you like cycling a bike. If you like swimming, that's fantastic. And I'm not against, and I don't want to be heard to be saying that I'm against any of those forms of exercise. My major point is that walking is our amazing adaptation, and it's the one that we overlook the most. And it's the one that's most accessible to us most easily right throughout the course of life. It doesn't require anything more than a reasonable pair of shoes, and if you're in Ireland, a raincoat. And that's really, you know, you experience the world in a different way when you're on a bicycle. You know, I do cycle a lot. I enjoy cycling. I have an electric bike which I use, but I hate cycling on the road because motorists are dangerous. I have a car as well, so when I cycle, I try to stick to cycle paths. Walking is as an exercise, very accessible from very early in life until very late in life. Not for everybody, but for most people, most of the time. And that's the kind of point that I kind of emphasize repeatedly in the book. We promised we'd do an experiment or two.
You want to?
Yeah, of course.
Let's do it.
Yeah, no,
Can we just do one more before you?
yeah, no, we can.
A
please,
question?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Your information is invaluable. Currently, we have a 15-year-old daughter who's in the ABCD brain study through the NIH.
Yeah.
And she's in the midst of it. It's a 10-year study to see how the brain functions with electronics, with exercise, with the change of life during COVID, and it's been very fascinating. So parents have to be part of the study too. And so the doctors who are studying these children across the nation ask them questions like, what motivates you to exercise? Do you do regular exercise? Do you run? Do you walk? And my daughter responds, it depends on what's chasing her, because she'd rather be on her phone or doing electronics. So my question to you is, what motivates these young people to get more active? I used to have to walk to school, and she's in high school, and they don't even pick up a phone. They just text each other. So there's not even interaction of their TMJ. So I wondered, what would you recommend to motivate these teenagers to move?
Yeah, so if I knew, I'd bottle it and sell it and make a fortune. And I have a 14-year-old myself, and she hates walking, but I make her walk anyway. So I think the kind of the key point that I come back to time and time again is that we are social walkers. And the best way to get people to walk is to walk together, to walk in groups. And we love walking in groups. Even if people are texting, they're still paying some partial attention to each other. And I think that's the key. They don't necessarily want to walk with adults, but there are lots of ways, I think, of trying to encourage them to walk together in groups. Now, again, that comes down to the safety of the built environment. Comes down to a whole lot of other questions that are things that we don't necessarily have control over. In my own case, happily, our school is like a 12 or 14-minute walk from the house. So that's easy, but that's because I live in an area that the school is easily accessible from. For other people, that may not be the case. It may be that you've got a freeway. How do you walk with the freeway? It's a horrible experience, the noise of the cars going past. So a lot of these things come back to how the environment is designed around you. In the building I work in, if you come in and you want to come to my office up on the 3rd floor, easy way to get to me is to take the lift or the elevator, as you call it here, because it's just there when you come in the door. If you want to take the stairs to come and visit me, you have to go through 4 fire doors. That's a really good example of how lousy building design militates against building movement in that should be easy. Microsoft have a large complex, not about 2 or 3 miles from where I live. And I know somebody works in their building there, and they've built a kind of a staircase which works around the circumference of the interior of the building. And people use that all the time instead of the lift because it's easy to use. The default in the environment there is to walk and to use the stairs. The default in my building is to use the elevator because that's the only way you can get up to me, unless you know the secret, go through the 4 fire doors. So the environmental design is really the key thing.
So should we do the
Let's do
exercise?
a quick experiment.
Yeah, let's do it.
So this is just to show you how you control your own legs. Are there any drummers in the room? Okay, so you might succeed where everybody else fails. Okay, so take your right hand and stick your index finger up in the air. A really easy thing to do. Now draw the number 6. Can you do that? Yeah? Do it again. It's really easy. Now, just leave your right hand up. Okay, now take your right foot and do a clockwise motion, an outwards motion. Okay, now you can all do that. Now do the number 6 and watch what happens to your foot.
Impossible.
No. So I know from the laughter this worked. Your foot went the way that you weren't expecting it and you hadn't commanded it to go. So this is a simple demonstration of motor programming and the priority that your brain has in the motor system. As far as your brain is concerned, it's given over an awful lot of real estate to the control of your hands and your fingers. It gives over relatively little space to the control of your legs, believe it or not. It actually ships that control down to your spinal cord. And when there's a competition, your brain says there's lots of things happening with my hands. There's not very much happening with my foot. My hands win.
Interesting,
Is that not amazing?
it is. Totally.
So let's do it. Can we do another?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so now I want you to do this very carefully. Okay. I'm going to ask you to do something which you just need to be careful when you do it. But first part of this is really simple. So take your thumb and stick it out in front of you. Hold your head still. Move your thumb to the left and the right and track your thumb. Okay, that's really easy. Now, hold your thumb out in front of you. Look at your thumb and turn your head while keep focusing on your thumb. You can do that? Yeah, that's easy. Okay. Now, in both of those cases, and then I'm going to ask you to do the unpleasant thing in a moment. In the first case, your eyes are moving, okay? And you're getting smooth pursuit. Your thumb shouldn't be doing this. As it should be, what you're seeing, it should be moving nice and smoothly, okay? So that's very simple. Now, what I want you to do is take your left index finger, hold your right thumb out, close your right eye, and just push the corner of your eye. Your thumb should jump around if you're doing it right. And just push the eyeball. That's all you have to do.
Oh.
Yeah, your thumb is jumping. Okay, but it's not jumping when you're doing this.
Wow.
Okay, why is that? It's because, again, another beautiful piece of design in the motor system subtracts out the movement of your eye when you're moving your eye yourself. When the oculomotor system is moving your eye, it subtracts that movement out. It's called, the technical term is efference copy, but it means that for every movement that you engage in, there's another copy of that movement somewhere in the nervous system. But you violate that rule when you move your own eyeball like this, because the movement is not coming from the oculomotor system. It's actually coming from the hand system.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so just watch what I'm doing, okay? Take your index finger, close your left, or close your right eye. Just touch your eyeball below. No, your left eyeball. Just don't touch the eyeball itself now. Look where I'm touching, okay? Put your other hand down, okay? Just take your finger, okay? Just push the eyeball like that, underneath. Don't touch the eyeball now. Do it through the lid. And is the world jumping around? Okay, you're not doing it right. Yeah, it jumps every time for me. You just push the eyeball. Literally, you're. So put a hand over an eye. That's fine. And just push the eyeball below. And the world should jump. You got that? But the world is not
Yes.
jumping when your eyeball is engaged
so
in voluntary movement. That's the difference.
Any other questions?
Cardiac.
8:10?
I have succeeded in convincing my nurse to get rid of the geezer shuffle. You remember, March
Right, there you go.
did boot camp. Would you agree with that?
Maybe. I don't know. Perhaps, yeah.
So my biggest disincentive to walking, I tell myself and I believe, and I'm saying that because I realize it's half a myth, is that I don't have time. Is that I just, like, no, I would walk if I had more time, or I'd do more walking if I had more time. So I'm curious to know what your 3 top hacks are, psychological or physical, to say, here's how you get yourself actually just walking.
Yes, so that's a great question, actually. So if you want to walk more, there are lots of things. The first thing is, I think you have to monitor. You must have your mobile phone on, or Fitbit or whatever, because nobody remembers how many thousand steps they took last Tuesday week. Anybody here? No, I can look it up, but I don't know. So the first thing is you have to have a record. If you don't have a record, you'll never know. And then like we all do have busy lives. There's lots of things going on. So if you drive, can you park further away? You know, when you go into a car park at a shop, you see people trying to fight to get into that space that's over beside the entrance to the shop. Why? Park at the first one and then take that walk. So that will give you a few hundred steps that you didn't have. If you're in your office and you're going for lunch, don't go to the regular cafe that you go to one that's a little bit further away. If you take public transport, regularly what I do, because I take the train to work, is I get out a stop or two early and I walk that extra stop. And you don't notice that you're doing it. If I take a phone call, which is a rare thing these days, who phones anybody anymore? But I never take a phone call sitting down. I always take a phone call walking. And just by being conscious like that, in my building, I never take the lift. I force myself every day to take the stairs. There are just simple little things like that. Just see what the defaults in your everyday behaviors are and see which one of those you can adjust just a little. And if you're conscious, if you're measuring what you're doing, you will actually find that you're adding extra steps. If somebody comes to your office and they want to talk about something, walk the corridors with them. Walk outside. You don't have to sit down and eyeball each other. Go for a little chat and walk. There's lots of ways of just building a little bit of extra movement in. And it's a nicer thing to do. None of these are magic bullets, by the way, but lots of small changes.
What I hear you, what you say is, and I realize my own thing, like, no, I have to walk 3 miles.
No. A few extra 100 steps here, a few extra 100 there over the course of the day regularly. One thing I always do is I have an alarm on my laptop, which I set to go off every 50 minutes. And I get up and I walk around for 2 or 3 minutes and then sit down again. And of course you get up and you go, oh, my back, and all of that stuff. But that's an easy thing to do rather than sitting there for an hour and just giving.
One last quick question.
Does housework count?
Yes, it does. Actually, believe it or not, there have been some great studies on housework. When you measure the amount of steps that people take if they're cleaning the house, it actually turns out to be quite a bit, especially if it's a 2 or 3 story house when you're running up and down stairs all the time. Yeah.
Recreational walking.
Yeah.
All I'm doing today is carrying things from point A
It's point B. Yeah. But I bet you if you measured the number of steps that you were taking, you'd be really surprised. And some of them will involve, walking up the stairs, carrying something. That's great. Putting that kind of load on your body is regularly is great.
Yeah, I was curious if all this walking has a direct impact on our endurance. So the more you walk, yes, it's healthy and it's all those things that you mentioned, but can we actually develop greater endurance just by strolling?
The answer is yes, but and the example that we spoke about at the start of the 62-year-old Italian is a great example of that. You can build the endurance very quickly, but you decondition really quickly too. So you have to keep it up. It's not like, you give yourself a dose of 10,000 steps for 30 days. That's you done for the year. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. If you give up after your 30 days, by 60 days, you'll be back to where you were on day 1. So you have to keep it up.
Thank you.
So we're going to wrap up, but I do want to just comment that as we have now gone deeper into all of this, I keep coming back to the notion that, in fact, many of the outcomes of walking are very similar to the things that we believe occur in some of the spiritual practices that we observe. And, the whole experience of awe and wonder when we're out in nature, the reduction in sort of the feeling of stress and some of the other elements when we're, in meditation. It seems like there's an awful lot of overlap here. I guess the question is whether or not there's any really good research coming out on some of these other practices that we should be paying attention to at this point.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work going on mindfulness and on meditation and on all of the things. So, and I think that the first thing to say is that people do experience interesting psychological states. There's no question about that. They're not always good, which is something that's not often said. So if you take people and you train them to be meditators, people who are naive meditators, about 20% of people who meditate find it to be an aversive experience.
Yeah.
They really do not like the dissolution of self that they experience. That not to say that casts any aspersions on the positive experience that the other 80% of people have, but we know with certainty that everything that people do, or there will be a group of people for whom it does not work.
Right.
And that's okay. Humans are different. But there's also little doubt that if you look over the course of human history, if you look across the planet, people chase the transcendent, however they define it, in all sorts of different ways. So I had the experience of being in India, I think in 2005, and the largest movement of people on the planet is to a religious festival which is held in October. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of it. I found myself, I was at a conference, but we diverted from the conference to attend the kind of this festival. And something like 100 million people turn up, or 80 million people turn up, and they walk from all over India to this place, and then they walk home again. There's this, not quite on the same scale, but there's a massive pilgrimage undertaken in Mexico every year, a Marian pilgrimage. I think something like 4 million people a year go to that, which is again an astonishing number. The Camino fell off a lot because of the COVID experience, but nonetheless, there are large numbers of people who undertake these long distance walks, not necessarily for one reason or another, but they get something of tremendous value for themselves from this. And I don't think there's enough work going on to understand what's going on. But nonetheless, it is clearly the case that people have done this since time immemorial. Walking and teaching is something that goes, the Greeks engaged in the peripatetic school. It's something that features in all sorts of stories from all sorts of times and places. And it is our natural adaptation. We get very good at it very, very quickly and very easily.
Well, thank you so much for this fascinating discussion of walking. I think we'll all think about this for a long time to come. It may even end up walking for a long time to come.
I hope so.
And I just want to mention that we are going on hiatus for the summer, as we always do. So this is the last of the events that we have planned for the 22-23 season. Hope to see everybody again next fall. We haven't yet set what we're going to do in September, but in October, we will have an introductory workshop to meditation, if anybody's really interested in that, given by the son of one of our parishioners who grew up in Greenwich and then lived in India for 20 years. And he's promised to demystify the whole process for everybody. And then on November 4th, Saturday, we're going to have some national figures come in and talk about the women's wellness movement that's underway. So be looking at your emails over the summer, because we'll be telling you more about some of these events coming up. And yes, we are going to be selling books back there. Jane's agreed to sign them. I will invite you to come over and have a drink if that's something of interest to you. And with that, I will sign out with our usual saying of, may you be happy, May you be well. May you be safe. May you be peaceful and at ease until we meet again. Good night.